Before history became legend, before legend became myth, there lived a man whose name would echo through the ages, not because he was the strongest, not because he was blessed with immortality, but because when the world demanded impossible choices, he refused to surrender. His name was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, warrior of Greece, a man admired by kings, respected by heroes, and feared by enemies. Yet this is not merely the story of a king. It is the story of a husband who longed to return to his family, a father whose son grew up without him, a warrior whose greatest battle was not fought with a sword, but against the will of the gods themselves. For 10 long years, the fires of the Trojan War consumed the world, and when victory finally came, every surviving warrior believed the nightmare had ended. They were wrong, because for Odysseus, the true journey was only beginning. The seas themselves would rise against him, ancient monsters would hunt him, enchantresses would tempt him, kings would betray him. Even the mighty gods of Olympus would decide whether he deserved to see his homeland again. Every island would test his courage. Every storm would challenge his faith. Every decision would shape the destiny of generations yet to come. Some called him the cleverest man alive. Others believed his pride invited disaster. But one thing could never be denied. Without Odysseus, the greatest adventure ever told would never have existed. This is the tale that inspired poets, shaped civilizations, and survived for nearly 3,000 years. A story of courage, a story of sacrifice, a story of love, and above all, a story about the impossible journey home. So dim the lights, listen carefully, and prepare to sail across the endless waters of the ancient world, where every wave hides a secret, every shadow conceals a monster, and every step brings one man closer to destiny. This is the complete story of Odysseus. But long before the storms, the monsters, and the endless years at sea, Odysseus had something worth returning to: a home. Across the blue waters of the Ionian Sea lay Ithaca, a small and rugged island of stone-covered hills, olive trees, and quiet shores. It was not the richest kingdom in Greece. Its armies were not the largest. Its palaces could not rival the great halls of Mycenae. But to Odysseus, Ithaca was everything. He was its king. And unlike many rulers whose power rested upon fear and conquest, Odysseus had become known for something far more unusual: his mind. Among the warriors of Greece were men stronger than him, men faster than him, men whose names terrified entire armies. Achilles possessed unmatched skill in battle. Ajax was a mountain among warriors. Agamemnon commanded kings and thousands of soldiers. But Odysseus possessed a weapon no sword could equal. He understood people. He watched. He listened. And while other men searched for the quickest path to victory, Odysseus searched for the path no one else could see. Yet behind the king, the warrior, and the strategist was another man entirely: a husband. His wife was Penelope. Beautiful, intelligent, and fiercely loyal, she was more than the queen of Ithaca. She was the person Odysseus trusted most. Their bond was not built merely upon duty. It was built upon understanding. Penelope possessed a patient intelligence that matched his own. Where Odysseus could read a battlefield, Penelope could read a room. Where he survived through cunning, she endured through patience. Together, they had a young son, Telemachus, and for a brief time, Odysseus possessed the kind of life warriors rarely appreciate until it is taken from them: a kingdom at peace, a wife he loved, a child beginning his life, a home waiting at the edge of the sea. But in the ancient world, the lives of mortals were never believed to belong entirely to themselves. Above them stood Olympus, and upon its heights, according to the old stories, the gods watched humanity. They loved, they argued, they became jealous, they chose favorites, and sometimes their rivalries spilled down into the lives of ordinary men. Among those gods was Athena, goddess of wisdom, strategy, and disciplined warfare. She was not impressed merely by strength. She admired intelligence, patience, resourcefulness, the ability to win a battle before the sword was ever drawn. And in Odysseus, Athena found a mortal whose mind reflected many of the qualities she valued most. He was imperfect. He could be proud. He could be reckless. And sometimes his confidence crossed dangerously close to arrogance. But he could think when other men panicked. He could endure when others surrendered. And when brute strength failed, Odysseus could turn desperation into opportunity. Athena would become one of his greatest divine allies. But even her protection could not shield him from every god, especially from the ruler of the sea, Poseidon, lord of earthquakes, horses, storms, and the vast waters surrounding Greece. The sea was his kingdom. And before Odysseus's journey was over, Poseidon's anger would transform those waters into a prison. But that conflict belonged to the future. For now, Ithaca was peaceful, and Odysseus had no desire to leave it. Then came the news that would change everything. Across the sea, a prince of Troy named Paris had taken Helen, the wife of Menelaus, king of Sparta. Whether Helen had been abducted or had gone willingly would be argued for centuries. But to the kings of Greece, one fact mattered above all others. She was gone, and Menelaus wanted her back. His brother Agamemnon saw something even greater than a family insult. He saw a reason for war. Messengers began traveling across Greece. Old promises were remembered. Alliances were called upon. Kings gathered their armies. Warships were prepared. Weapons were forged. One kingdom after another answered the call. And eventually, the summons reached Ithaca. Odysseus understood immediately what it meant. If he sailed to Troy, there was no guarantee he would ever return. Wars between kings were rarely short. And Troy was no ordinary city. Its walls were legendary. Its warriors were feared. Its wealth had made it powerful. To attack Troy was to challenge one of the strongest cities in the known world. Odysseus looked at his kingdom, at Penelope, at his infant son. Everything that mattered to him was here, not across the sea, not beneath the walls of Troy, here. And so, according to one ancient tradition, Odysseus tried to escape the war before it could claim him. When the Greek envoys arrived to collect him, they found the king behaving strangely. Odysseus appeared to have lost his mind. He yoked mismatched animals to a plow and began driving them across a field. Instead of planting seed into the earth, he scattered salt. To anyone watching, the king of Ithaca seemed mad, and a madman could hardly be expected to command soldiers in war. For a moment, the deception appeared perfect. But among the visitors was a clever man named Palamedes. He did not believe what he was seeing, and so he devised a test. Telemachus, still only a baby, was placed in the path of the plow. Odysseus approached. The animals moved forward. The blade cut through the earth, and then Odysseus stopped. Whatever performance he had created disappeared instantly. A madman might have continued. A father could not. Odysseus turned the plow away from his son. And with that single movement, the truth was revealed. He was perfectly sane. The king of Ithaca would have to honor the oath. He would have to sail for Troy. Imagine that moment, not as the beginning of some glorious adventure, but as a man standing inside his own home, knowing that soon he would walk away from everything he loved. He could not know that his infant son would become a grown man before he saw him again. He could not know that Penelope would spend years surrounded by men trying to replace him. He could not know that friends who sailed beside him would die thousands of miles from home. And he certainly could not know that even after Troy finally fell, the journey back to Ithaca would become far more dangerous than the war itself. Odysseus prepared his ships. His warriors gathered. Supplies were carried aboard. Sails were raised, and on the shore stood the family he was leaving behind. Penelope, Telemachus, Ithaca, the three things that would remain inside his mind through every storm that followed. Perhaps Odysseus believed he would be gone for a year, perhaps two. No mortal standing upon that shore could have imagined the truth. 20 years would pass before Odysseus finally stood in his homeland again. 10 years of war, and nearly 10 more years trying to cross the sea home. As the ships departed Ithaca, the island slowly disappeared behind the horizon. Odysseus could only look back. He was sailing toward Troy, toward Achilles, toward Hector, toward armies large enough to shake the earth beneath their feet, and toward a war that would become one of the most famous conflicts ever remembered. But the man who left Ithaca that day was not yet the Odysseus whose name would survive for thousands of years. That man would be forged by what came next. For beyond the horizon, Troy was waiting, and Troy was unlike anything Odysseus had ever seen. As the Greek fleet crossed the Aegean, hundreds of wooden ships moved across the water like a floating kingdom. Their sails filled the horizon. Warriors crowded the decks. Bronze shields reflected the morning sun. Kings who had once ruled separately now sailed toward a single enemy. Among them was Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and commander of the Greek forces. His brother Menelaus, king of Sparta, sailed to reclaim Helen. Ajax came with his enormous strength. Nestor brought the wisdom of age. Odysseus brought the warriors of Ithaca, and among them sailed the most feared fighter of them all, Achilles. Even among legendary warriors, Achilles stood apart. Young, proud, almost impossibly gifted in battle, he moved with a speed and precision that made other soldiers seem ordinary. Where Odysseus represented intelligence, patience, and strategy, Achilles represented something far more immediate: power. When Achilles entered battle, men remembered his name. But Troy had heroes of its own, and the greatest among them was Hector, Prince of Troy, son of King Priam, husband, father, and defender of the city. Hector did not fight because he dreamed of conquest. He fought because behind the walls of Troy lived his family, his people, and everything he had sworn to protect. Two civilizations were now moving toward one another, and between them stood walls that seemed impossible to break. When Odysseus first saw Troy rising above the plain, he understood immediately why the city had survived so many enemies. Its enormous stone fortifications towered over the landscape. Watchtowers guarded the approaches. Trojan soldiers lined the battlements. Behind those walls stood temples, palaces, homes, markets, and thousands of people whose lives depended upon the warriors defending them. The Greeks had crossed an ocean to take Troy. The Trojans had nowhere to retreat, and so the war began. At first, perhaps some of the Greeks imagined victory would come quickly. They had assembled some of the greatest warriors of their age. They possessed ships, weapons, armies, and kings. But Troy refused to fall. Days became weeks. Weeks became months. Months became years. Battles erupted across the plains outside the city. Spears darkened the sky. Shields collided. Chariots thundered across the earth. Warriors fought beneath the burning Mediterranean sun and returned to their camps exhausted, only to rise and fight again. Sometimes the Greeks pushed toward Troy. Sometimes the Trojans drove them back toward their ships. Neither side could achieve the victory it needed, and the longer the war continued, the more expensive every small triumph became. Men who had sailed from Greece dreaming of glory began to understand the true nature of war. It was not songs. It was not statues. It was not stories told beside warm fires. It was waiting, hunger, fear, exhaustion, and the constant knowledge that the next battle might be the last. Odysseus watched all of it. He fought when battle demanded it. He advised the kings when strategy was required. He negotiated disputes between men whose pride sometimes threatened the Greek army almost as much as Troy itself. And he learned. Every year taught him something. About war, about kings, about fear, and about the dangerous pride of powerful men. No example was greater than the conflict between Achilles and Agamemnon. Agamemnon commanded the Greek expedition. Achilles was its greatest warrior. Neither man enjoyed being challenged. When their dispute became personal, Achilles withdrew from battle. Suddenly, the Greeks discovered how dependent they had become upon a single warrior. Without Achilles, the balance shifted. The Trojans surged forward, and leading them was Hector. Hector drove the Greeks back across the plain. Trojan warriors pushed closer and closer to the Greek ships. For the first time, the possibility of complete Greek defeat became terrifyingly real. The ships were more than transportation. They were the Greeks' only road home. If Troy destroyed them, thousands of warriors would be trapped on a hostile shore. Odysseus fought desperately to hold the army together. But courage alone could not replace Achilles. Then the war took another tragic turn. Patroclus, the beloved companion of Achilles, entered battle wearing Achilles' armor. For a moment, the Trojans believed the legendary warrior had returned. Their advance faltered, but Hector eventually confronted Patroclus, and Patroclus fell. When the news reached Achilles, grief consumed him. The argument with Agamemnon no longer mattered. The war itself almost seemed secondary. Achilles wanted Hector. He returned to battle, and the battlefield changed. Achilles drove toward Troy with terrifying determination. Trojan soldiers retreated toward their walls, but Hector remained outside. He knew what was coming. Behind him stood Troy. Before him stood Achilles. The two greatest warriors of the war finally met. Their duel would become one of the most remembered moments of the ancient world. Hector fought with courage, but Achilles was unstoppable. Hector fell, and Troy lost its greatest defender. Yet even that was not enough to end the war. The walls remained. The gates remained closed. The Trojan army still resisted, and time continued its merciless march. 1 year, 3 years, 5, 7, 9. Nearly 10 years had passed since Odysseus left Ithaca. Think of what that meant. Telemachus, the infant he had held before departing, was no longer a baby. Penelope had spent almost a decade waiting. The warriors of Ithaca, who had sailed away as young men, now carried scars across their bodies and memories they could never erase. Some would never see Greece again. Odysseus himself had changed. The man who once attempted to escape the war by pretending to be mad had now spent almost 10 years living inside it. And still Troy stood. By the 10th year, one truth had become impossible to ignore. The Greeks could not simply overpower the city. Achilles could defeat warriors. Agamemnon could command armies. Thousands of Greek soldiers could attack the walls. But Troy had survived them all. And then Odysseus began looking at the city differently. Perhaps the problem was not that the Greeks lacked strength. Perhaps the problem was that they were still trying to win through strength. A wall could resist an army. A gate could stop 1,000 soldiers. But what if the Trojans themselves opened the gates? What if victory did not require destroying Troy's defenses? What if the Greeks could convince Troy to defeat itself? The idea forming inside Odysseus's mind was dangerous, almost absurd. It required patience, deception, perfect timing, and an enormous wooden horse. After 10 years of bloodshed, the Trojan War would not be decided by the strongest warrior. It would be decided by the cleverest man. For 10 years, the Greeks had tried to break Troy with weapons. They had failed. Thousands of warriors had crossed the sea. Heroes had fought and died. The greatest fighter among the Trojans, Hector, was gone. Even Achilles, the greatest warrior of Greece, would not live to see the war's end. And still, the walls of Troy stood. But Odysseus had finally understood something the others had not. Perhaps Troy did not need to be conquered from the outside. Perhaps the Greeks needed to find a way inside, not through force, through deception. The idea was almost unbelievable. The Greeks would construct an enormous wooden horse, large enough for a group of warriors to hide inside. Then the Greek army would do something Troy had waited 10 years to see. They would leave. Their camps would be abandoned, their fires extinguished. Their ships would disappear from the coast. To the Trojans, it would appear that the war was finally over. But the Greeks would not truly be gone. Their fleet would sail only far enough to remain hidden, and inside the wooden horse, Odysseus and a chosen group of warriors would wait. Everything depended upon one question. Would the Trojans bring the horse inside their own walls? The Greeks began construction. Timbers were cut. Heavy beams were joined together. Slowly, the shape of an enormous horse rose above the Greek camp. Its wooden body towered over the men working beneath it. Inside, a hidden chamber was created. There would be no comfort there, no easy escape. Once the warriors entered, they would be trapped inside their own deception. If the Trojans discovered them, there would be nowhere to run. But after 10 years of war, Odysseus understood that victory required a risk greater than anything they had attempted before. When the horse was finished, the plan began. The Greeks burned or dismantled parts of their camp. Soldiers boarded the ships. Sails rose over the water. And slowly, the fleet that had haunted Troy for a decade disappeared beyond the horizon. Then silence fell across the plain. Imagine the Trojans standing upon their walls that morning. For 10 years, they had looked down and seen an enemy army. Tents, weapons, smoke, thousands of soldiers, ships covering the coastline. Now, nothing. The Greek camp was empty. The ships were gone. The war appeared to be over. The gates of Troy opened. For the first time in years, Trojan citizens and soldiers walked freely onto the battlefield without expecting an attack. And there, standing alone upon the abandoned plain, was the horse, massive, silent, mysterious. Some believed it was an offering to the gods, a final gift left by the defeated Greeks before sailing home. Others were suspicious. Why would an enemy who had spent 10 years trying to destroy Troy leave behind such an extraordinary object? Ancient tradition remembers warnings. The Trojan priest Laocoon distrusted the gift. He warned his people to fear the Greeks even when they came bearing gifts. Another voice of warning belonged to Cassandra, daughter of King Priam. She possessed the terrible gift of prophecy, yet according to legend, she was cursed never to be believed. She foresaw disaster. She understood that bringing the horse into Troy would lead to destruction. But victory is intoxicating. After 10 years of fear, grief, and siege, the people wanted to believe the nightmare had ended. They wanted celebration. They wanted peace. They wanted proof that Troy had defeated the greatest army Greece could assemble. And the horse became that proof. The Trojans decided to bring it inside. There was one problem. The horse was enormous. Moving it required ropes, manpower, and tremendous effort. Slowly, the giant wooden structure rolled toward the city, toward the walls the Greeks had failed to cross for 10 years, toward the gates that had resisted every attack. And then something extraordinary happened. The Trojans themselves carried the Greek soldiers through those defenses. Hidden inside the darkness of the wooden horse, Odysseus waited. He could hear voices outside, the grinding of wheels, the pulling of ropes, the celebrations. Perhaps he could hear children running through the streets, perhaps music, perhaps soldiers laughing because they believed they would never again wake to the sound of Greek weapons. Odysseus and his men could do nothing. They had to remain completely silent. One cough, one dropped weapon, one accidental movement, and the entire plan could collapse. The horse passed through the gates. For the first time in 10 years, Odysseus was inside Troy, but he could not move yet. The city celebrated. Wine flowed. Families gathered. Soldiers who had lived beneath the shadow of war finally allowed themselves to relax. Night descended. Torches burned throughout Troy. The enormous wooden horse stood silently inside the city. Hours passed. The celebrations faded. One by one, the streets became quiet. The city slept. And inside the horse, Odysseus opened his eyes. It was time. The hidden warriors carefully emerged. They descended into the sleeping city. Their first objective was not conquest. It was the gates. Because beyond Troy, hidden in the darkness of the sea, the Greek fleet had returned. The ships approached the coastline without lights. Thousands of warriors waited. And inside Troy, Odysseus and his companions reached the gates. The same gates that had stopped Greece for 10 years. The barriers were removed. The entrance opened, and the Greek army poured into the city. Troy awakened to chaos. The war everyone believed had ended had entered their homes. Greek soldiers moved through the streets. Trojan defenders rushed to their weapons. Confusion spread faster than commands could be given. The city that had survived 10 years of siege had been defeated in a single night. Not because its walls were weak, not because its soldiers lacked courage, but because its enemy had convinced Troy to open itself from within. The city burned. Temples, towers, and homes disappeared beneath smoke and flame. The royal house of Priam fell. The world that Hector had died protecting collapsed around his people. And Helen, whose departure from Sparta had helped ignite the conflict years earlier, would eventually return with Menelaus. For the Greeks, Troy's fall was victory. But victory did not feel as glorious as the songs would later make it sound. Odysseus had spent 10 years reaching this moment. 10 years away from Penelope. 10 years away from Telemachus. 10 years away from Ithaca. Now the war was finally over. He had survived. His plan had succeeded. And for the first time in a decade, nothing stood between Odysseus and home except the sea. The Greek kings prepared to leave. Ships were loaded. Surviving warriors gathered what remained of their belongings. The coastline that had once held an enormous Greek encampment slowly emptied. Odysseus boarded his ship. Behind him, smoke still rose from Troy. Before him stretched the endless blue water of the Aegean. Somewhere beyond that horizon was Ithaca, Penelope, Telemachus, home. Perhaps Odysseus believed the hardest part of his life was finally behind him. He had survived the greatest war of his age. He had defeated a city no army could conquer. He had outsmarted Troy. But Odysseus was about to discover that defeating men was one thing, surviving gods and monsters was another. The Trojan War had taken 10 years of his life. His journey home would take almost 10 more. And before Odysseus saw Ithaca again, he would learn what it meant to make an enemy of the sea itself. Troy was behind him. Home was ahead. And between Odysseus and Ithaca stretched the sea. When the Greek ships left the ruined city, Odysseus commanded 12 vessels, filled with men who had survived 10 years of war. They were exhausted. They had watched friends die. They had slept beneath foreign skies for a decade. Now they wanted only one thing: home. Odysseus imagined Ithaca waiting beyond the horizon. He imagined walking through his palace again. He imagined Penelope and Telemachus. The infant he had left behind would now be nearly a young man. After everything Odysseus had survived, crossing the sea seemed almost simple. But the journey had barely begun. The first troubles came quickly. After leaving Troy, Odysseus and his men raided the land of the Cicones at Ismarus. At first, the Greeks succeeded, but Odysseus urged his men not to remain. They had taken what they needed. It was time to leave. His warriors did not listen. They celebrated. They ate. They drank. And while they delayed, the Cicones gathered reinforcements. The counterattack was devastating. Odysseus escaped with his ships, but not without losing men. It was the first warning. The war was over, but death had followed them onto the sea. Then the weather turned. Powerful winds drove the fleet away from its intended course. For days they struggled against the water, until eventually they reached a strange and peaceful land. There lived the Lotus Eaters. They did not attack the Greeks. They did not raise weapons. They offered food, a strange lotus. Some of Odysseus' men ate it, and something changed. They forgot their urgency. They forgot Ithaca. They forgot why they had ever wanted to leave. The lotus did not imprison the body. It imprisoned desire. Those who tasted it wanted only to remain there, eating the lotus and living without responsibility, without memory, without longing. For exhausted men who had spent 10 years fighting, perhaps forgetting everything felt like mercy. But Odysseus understood the danger. He dragged the affected men back to the ships. They resisted. They begged to stay. Odysseus ordered them tied beneath the benches until the ships were safely away. Once again, the sails rose. Once again, Ithaca called from somewhere beyond the horizon. And then they reached another island. At first, it seemed like fortune had finally favored them. The land was fertile. Animals grazed freely. Food appeared plentiful. But curiosity had always been both one of Odysseus's greatest strengths and one of his greatest weaknesses. He wanted to know who lived there. Taking a small group of men, Odysseus explored the island. Eventually, they discovered a gigantic cave. Inside were enormous baskets, shelves of cheese, pens filled with sheep and goats. Everything was strangely oversized. Odysseus's men became nervous. They suggested taking some food and returning immediately to the ships. Odysseus refused. He wanted to meet the owner. Perhaps, according to the sacred customs of hospitality, the stranger would welcome them. Perhaps he would offer gifts. So they waited. As evening approached, something enormous appeared at the entrance. A Cyclops. His name was Polyphemus, a gigantic shepherd with a single eye. He was also, according to the story, the son of Poseidon, the god of the sea. Polyphemus drove his flock inside. Then he lifted an enormous stone and rolled it across the entrance. The Greeks were trapped. The Cyclops noticed them. Odysseus stepped forward. He appealed to the ancient laws of hospitality. They were travelers, he explained, men returning from war, guests seeking shelter. But Polyphemus cared nothing for their customs. He feared neither men nor gods. And soon Odysseus understood that they had entered the home of something that did not see them as guests. It saw them as prey. The Cyclops seized members of Odysseus's crew. The trapped warriors watched helplessly. Odysseus reached for his sword. He could attack. He could kill the monster while it slept. Then he looked toward the entrance. The enormous stone blocking the cave was far too heavy for any of them to move. If they killed Polyphemus, they would remain trapped inside forever. Strength would not save them. Again, Odysseus needed his mind. He studied the cave, the sheep, the giant. And slowly, a plan formed. Odysseus carried strong wine taken from the ship. He offered it to Polyphemus. The Cyclops drank and demanded more. Odysseus poured another cup, then another. The giant became increasingly intoxicated. Polyphemus finally asked Odysseus his name. Odysseus answered carefully, "My name is Nobody." The Cyclops laughed. He promised that nobody would be the last man he consumed. Then the wine overwhelmed him. Polyphemus collapsed into sleep. Odysseus and his surviving companions moved quickly. Earlier, they had prepared a large wooden stake. They hardened its point in the fire. Now they lifted it together. They approached the sleeping Cyclops and drove the burning point into his single eye. Polyphemus awakened with a roar. The cave erupted into chaos. The blinded giant reached wildly through the darkness, trying to seize the Greeks. Outside the cave, other Cyclopes heard his screams. They called to him. Who was attacking him? Polyphemus shouted back, "Nobody. Nobody was attacking him. Nobody was hurting him." Hearing this, the others assumed no enemy was present. They left. Odysseus' deception had worked. But they were still inside the cave. At dawn, the blinded Polyphemus moved the great stone from the entrance so his sheep could leave. He sat beside the opening. As each animal passed, he felt its back with his hands. He knew the Greeks might attempt to escape among the flock. Odysseus had anticipated this. Instead of riding upon the sheep, the men clung beneath them. One by one, the animals walked past the blind Cyclops. His hands moved across their backs. But beneath their bodies, Odysseus and his men remained hidden. They escaped. They ran toward the shore. They reached their ship. The oars struck the water. The vessel began moving away from the island. Odysseus had done it. Through patience and intelligence, he had defeated an enemy far stronger than himself. He should have sailed away silently. He should have accepted victory. But Odysseus had another weakness: pride. From the safety of his ship, he shouted toward Polyphemus. The Cyclops heard him. Odysseus mocked the monster that had imprisoned them. Polyphemus tore an enormous rock from the shore and hurled it toward the sound. It crashed into the sea near the ship. The waves nearly drove the vessel back toward the island. Odysseus's crew begged him to stop. "Do not speak again. Do not reveal who you are. Sail away." But pride demanded recognition. Odysseus shouted once more. He told the Cyclops that if anyone ever asked who had blinded him, he should tell them the truth. It was Odysseus, king of Ithaca, the destroyer of Troy. In that moment, victory became disaster, because Polyphemus now knew his name, and Polyphemus raised his hands toward the sea. He called upon his father, Poseidon, god of the ocean. He asked Poseidon to punish Odysseus. If destiny demanded that Odysseus eventually return home, then let that return take years. Let him lose his companions. Let him arrive broken. Let suffering follow him across the sea. Far beneath the waves, according to the ancient story, a god heard his son's prayer. Odysseus had survived Troy through intelligence. He had escaped the Cyclops through deception, but his pride had now made an enemy far more powerful than any mortal warrior: the sea itself. The ship sailed onward. The island disappeared behind them. Odysseus looked toward the horizon. Ithaca was still somewhere ahead, but from that moment forward, every wave beneath his ship belonged to Poseidon, and the god of the sea was angry. Odysseus had escaped the Cyclops, but he had not escaped the consequences of his pride. Behind his ship, the island of Polyphemus slowly disappeared beneath the horizon. Ahead stretched the endless sea, and somewhere beneath those dark waters ruled Poseidon. The god had heard the prayer of his wounded son. From this moment forward, the journey would change. Odysseus and his remaining ships sailed onward until they reached the floating island of Aeolia. There lived Aeolus, keeper of the winds. Unlike many of the dangers Odysseus had encountered, Aeolus welcomed the travelers. For an entire month, Odysseus and his men rested. They ate. They recovered their strength. And Odysseus told Aeolus the extraordinary story of Troy. He spoke of the 10-year siege, of Achilles and Hector, of the wooden horse, of the night Troy finally fell. When the time came for Odysseus to leave, Aeolus offered him something more valuable than gold: a path home. Aeolus gathered the dangerous winds that could drive the ships away from Ithaca. He sealed them inside a leather bag. Only one wind was left free: the gentle western wind that would carry Odysseus directly toward home. Aeolus gave the bag to Odysseus with a warning: do not open it. As long as the winds remained trapped, the sea would carry him toward Ithaca. For the first time since leaving Troy, the journey seemed blessed. The sails filled. The ships moved steadily across calm water. Day after day, Odysseus watched the horizon. And then, after years of war and months of wandering, Ithaca appeared. His homeland, so close that Odysseus could see the fires burning along the shore. Imagine what that moment must have meant. For 10 years, he had dreamed of this island. He had imagined Penelope waiting inside the palace. He had wondered how much Telemachus had grown. He had survived Troy. He had survived storms. He had survived the Lotus Eaters. He had escaped the cave of Polyphemus. And now, home was directly ahead. Odysseus had barely slept during the voyage. He had personally guarded the mysterious bag Aeolus had given him. But exhaustion finally overcame him. With Ithaca almost within reach, Odysseus fell asleep. His men looked at the bag. For days they had watched their king protect it. They knew Aeolus had given Odysseus a private gift, and suspicion began to grow. Perhaps the bag contained gold, perhaps silver, perhaps treasure that Odysseus intended to keep for himself. After everything they had endured together, why should their king receive riches while they returned home with nothing? Curiosity became resentment. Resentment became temptation. And while Odysseus slept, his men opened the bag. The winds exploded free. The calm sea transformed instantly. Sails snapped violently. Ropes strained. Waves rose around the ships. The wind that had carried them toward Ithaca disappeared beneath a storm of competing forces. Odysseus awakened to chaos. He looked toward his homeland. The island was moving farther away. Not because Ithaca had moved, because the storm was dragging them back across the sea. Odysseus could do nothing. The home he had nearly touched slowly vanished behind rain and darkness. The fleet was blown all the way back to Aeolia. Odysseus returned to Aeolus in humiliation. He begged for help. "Give us the winds again. Give us another chance." But Aeolus refused. To him there could be only one explanation for such extraordinary misfortune. The gods themselves must hate this man, and no mortal should interfere with the judgment of the gods. Odysseus was ordered to leave. There would be no second gift, no favorable wind, no easy road home. The ships returned to the sea. For 6 exhausting days the men rowed. There was little wind to help them. Their arms burned with every stroke. Their hands became raw. Their hope weakened. Then they reached another land, a place called Telemachus, home of the Lastrygonians. The harbor seemed almost perfect. Tall cliffs surrounded the water, protecting it from the open sea. A narrow entrance led into a calm, natural bay. One by one, the Greek ships entered, but Odysseus hesitated. Something about the place troubled him. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps years of war had taught him never to trust a place that appeared too safe. Instead of sailing his own vessel deep into the harbor, he anchored near the entrance. Then he sent scouts inland. They discovered inhabitants unlike ordinary men. The Lastrygonians were a race of enormous and terrifying people ruled by King Antiphates. The scouts quickly realized they were in danger. They ran, but the warning came too late. The Lastrygonians descended upon the harbor. From the cliffs above, enormous rocks crashed down toward the Greek fleet. The protected harbor that had seemed like a refuge became a trap. Ships could not maneuver. They could not escape quickly through the narrow entrance. Wooden hulls shattered. Masts collapsed. Men threw themselves into the water. Odysseus watched from his ship near the mouth of the harbor. There was no battle to win, no strategy that could save the fleet. Only escape. He drew his sword and cut the rope holding his ship. His men seized their oars. They rowed toward open water. Behind them, destruction consumed the fleet. One ship escaped. One. Odysseus had left Troy commanding 12 vessels. Now only his own remained. The sea around him suddenly felt much larger. The men aboard his ship looked back toward the horizon. Friends they had known for years were gone. Warriors who had survived Troy had fallen before ever seeing Greece again. The journey was no longer an adventure. It was becoming a process of loss. Every island seemed to take something from Odysseus. Men, ships, time, hope, and still Ithaca remained somewhere beyond the horizon. Odysseus now commanded a single ship, a single exhausted crew, and the knowledge that Poseidon's curse might be only beginning. But the sea offered no time for mourning. They sailed until another island appeared, green, forested, strangely peaceful. Smoke rose somewhere beyond the trees. The men desperately needed food. They needed water. They needed rest. But after everything they had experienced, no one rushed ashore. Odysseus climbed to higher ground and studied the island. Somewhere within the forest stood a house. And inside that house lived someone who would change the journey again. A woman feared by men, respected by gods. A sorceress capable of transforming those who entered her home. Her name was Circe. One ship remained, one exhausted crew, and ahead of them waited an island unlike any they had seen before. Its name was Aya, the home of Circe. After the destruction of the fleet, Odysseus and his surviving men reached the island, desperate for food, water, and rest. For 2 days they remained near the shore. No one wanted another adventure. No one wanted another mysterious cave. No one wanted to discover what might be hiding beyond the trees. They wanted Ithaca, but survival forced them forward. Odysseus climbed to a high point and looked across the island. In the distance, smoke rose above the forest. Someone lived there. Odysseus divided his remaining crew into two groups. One would remain with the ship. The other would explore the island under the command of Eurylochus. The men entered the forest. After traveling through the trees, they discovered a magnificent house standing in a clearing. Around it wandered strange animals. Lions, wolves, but they did not attack. Instead, they behaved almost like domesticated animals. The men should have understood the warning. From inside the house came the sound of a woman singing. Her name was Circe. She welcomed the travelers inside. Food was placed before them. Wine was poured. After everything they had suffered, the invitation seemed almost miraculous. The men ate. They drank. And then Circe revealed her power. With magic, she transformed Odysseus's companions into swine. Their bodies changed, but according to the ancient story, their human minds remained trapped within. Only Eurylochus had remained outside. He had suspected danger and refused to enter. When he saw what happened, he ran. He returned to Odysseus and told him everything. The strange house, the woman, the animals, the transformation. Eurylochus begged Odysseus not to go. They should leave immediately. But Odysseus would not abandon his men. He took his sword and walked alone into the forest. On the way, however, he encountered someone unexpected, the god Hermes, messenger of Olympus. Hermes knew what waited inside Circe's home. He gave Odysseus a mysterious herb called moly. It would protect him from Circe's magic. Then Hermes told him what to do. Odysseus entered the house. Circe welcomed him as she had welcomed the others. She offered him food and wine. She mixed her magic into his drink. Odysseus drank. Circe raised her wand. She expected another transformation. Nothing happened. For perhaps the first time, the sorceress looked at the stranger before her with genuine surprise. Odysseus drew his sword. Circe understood immediately that this was no ordinary traveler. The confrontation ended not with death, but with an agreement. Circe restored his companions to human form. And something remarkable happened. The island that had seemed like another deadly trap became a refuge. Odysseus and his men remained with Circe for an entire year. They ate, they drank, their wounds healed. For men who had spent years surrounded by death, Aetia offered something dangerously close to peace. Days became weeks, weeks became months, and once again, Odysseus risked forgetting the reason he was traveling at all. His men eventually reminded him. Ithaca was still waiting. Penelope was still waiting. Telemachus was still waiting. Odysseus approached Circe. He asked her to help him return home. Circe agreed, but the path she described was not the path Odysseus expected. Before he could continue toward Ithaca, she told him he would need knowledge that only one person could give him, the blind prophet Tiresias. There was one problem. Tiresias was dead. Odysseus would have to travel to the edge of the world and speak with the dead. The journey took them across dark waters to a distant, mist-covered land. There, following Circe's instructions, Odysseus performed the ancient rites required to summon the spirits of the underworld. The air changed. The darkness seemed to deepen, and from the realm of the dead, shadows began to gather. Odysseus had faced armies. He had faced giants. He had faced storms, but nothing prepared him for this. These were not enemies he could fight. They were memories given shape. Among the spirits came someone Odysseus knew, Elpenor, one of his own companions. He had died on Circe's island shortly before their departure, falling from a rooftop in a tragic accident. Odysseus had left without realizing what had happened. Now Elpenor begged him for one final act of dignity. Return to Aea, find his body, give him a proper burial. Odysseus promised he would. Then another spirit approached, and Odysseus recognized her. His mother, Anticlea. When Odysseus had sailed for Troy, she had been alive. He had imagined that somewhere in Ithaca she was waiting for her son to return. Now she stood among the dead. Odysseus had not even known she was gone. He tried to embrace her. His arms passed through shadow. He tried again. Nothing. The warrior who had survived Troy could do nothing but stand before the spirit of his mother. She told him about Ithaca. Penelope remained faithful. Telemachus had grown. His father still lived. But grief had entered the family Odysseus had left behind. His mother herself had died, overwhelmed by longing for her absent son. For perhaps the first time, Odysseus truly understood the cost of his absence. The journey was not only taking years from him, it was taking years from everyone waiting for him. Finally, Tiresias appeared. The prophet carried the knowledge Odysseus had crossed into darkness to find. He warned him. Poseidon's anger had not ended. The road home would remain dangerous. But there was still a path to Ithaca. Odysseus and his men would eventually reach an island where the sacred cattle of the sun god Helios grazed. They must not touch them, no matter how hungry they became, no matter how desperate. If the cattle remained unharmed, there was hope that Odysseus and his companions could return home. But if they harmed them, destruction would follow. His ship would be lost. His companions would die. And Odysseus would return to Ithaca alone. There was more. Even if he reached home, his suffering would not immediately end. His palace would no longer be the home he remembered. Men would have entered his halls. They would compete for Penelope. They would consume his wealth. They would assume their king was dead. Odysseus listened. After everything he had endured, the thought of strangers occupying his home must have burned inside him. But there was nothing he could do yet. Ithaca remained far away. Before Odysseus left the realm of the dead, more spirits appeared. Warriors from Troy, men whose names belonged to another chapter of his life. Agamemnon, Achilles, Ajax, the heroes who had once seemed almost immortal, now existed only as shadows. Odysseus spoke with Achilles. During the war, Achilles had possessed everything warriors were taught to desire. Strength, glory, a name that would survive for generations. But death had changed the meaning of those things. The greatest warrior of Greece now understood the value of simply being alive. Odysseus listened. Perhaps the lesson was meant for him. For years, pride had shaped his decisions. He had wanted the Cyclops to know his name. He had wanted his victories remembered. But here, surrounded by the dead, glory seemed strangely small. The living possessed something even kings could not buy once it was lost: time. Odysseus left the underworld changed. He returned to Circe's island. He fulfilled his promise to Elpenor and gave his fallen companion the burial he had requested. Then Circe prepared Odysseus for what waited ahead. The dangers would come quickly now. First, he would pass creatures whose voices were more dangerous than weapons. The Sirens, their song could make sailors forget everything except the desire to follow them. If Odysseus survived them, the sea itself would narrow into a passage between two horrors. On one side, Scylla; on the other, Charybdis. There would be no safe path, only a choice between dangers. Odysseus returned to his ship. His remaining companions took their places. The sails rose. Aea slowly disappeared behind them. Ahead, the sea looked calm, But Odysseus now knew better than to trust calm water. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the Sirens were already waiting, and soon Odysseus would hear the song, "No sailor was meant to survive." Odysseus had spoken with the dead. Now he had to survive long enough to return to the living. Circe had warned him about what waited ahead. The first danger would not attack with claws or weapons. It would sing. The Sirens lived beside the sea. Their voices were said to possess an irresistible power. Any sailor who heard their song would forget his journey, forget his family, forget everything except the desire to move closer. And those who followed the voices never returned. But Odysseus was curious. He wanted to hear the song, so he created a plan. He ordered his men to soften beeswax and press it into their ears. They would hear nothing. Odysseus, however, would keep his ears uncovered. Instead, his crew tied him tightly to the ship's mast. He gave them one command. No matter what he said, no matter how desperately he begged, they must not release him. The ship sailed onward. At first there was only wind, water, the creaking of wood. Then the wind seemed to disappear. The sea became strangely calm. And across the water, Odysseus heard them. The Sirens. Their voices were beautiful. Not merely beautiful, impossible to resist. They called to Odysseus by name. They promised knowledge. They promised secrets. They promised to sing of Troy and everything that had happened there. They knew exactly what kind of temptation could capture a man like Odysseus. Not pleasure, knowledge. Odysseus struggled against the ropes. He shouted at his crew, "Release me! Turn the ship! Take me toward them!" But his sailors could not hear him. Their ears were sealed with wax. They only saw their king fighting desperately against his restraints. And remembering his command, they tightened the ropes. The ship continued forward. The voices slowly faded. Odysseus had heard the song of the Sirens and survived, but there was no time to celebrate. Circe's second warning was already ahead. The sea began to narrow. Dark cliffs rose on both sides. The water became violent, and somewhere inside that narrow passage waited two horrors, Scylla and Charybdis. Charybdis was a monstrous force of the sea, a vast whirlpool capable of swallowing entire ships. At intervals, the ocean itself seemed to collapse into her. Any vessel pulled into that vortex could disappear beneath the water. Across from Charybdis lived Scylla, a terrifying creature hidden among the cliffs. To avoid one meant sailing closer to the other. There was no perfect route, no clever trick that would allow everyone to escape. Circe had told Odysseus the terrible truth: sail closer to Scylla. Some men would be lost, but the ship might survive. Sail too close to Charybdis, and everyone could die. For a leader who had spent years trying to save his companions, it was an unbearable choice. Odysseus did not tell his crew everything. If they knew what waited ahead, fear might destroy their ability to row. He ordered them forward. The ship entered the passage. On one side, the water began twisting violently. Charybdis. The men pulled at the oars. Odysseus watched the whirlpool. Every instinct told him to move farther away, and that was exactly what brought them closer to Scylla. The attack came from above. Before the crew could understand what was happening, Scylla struck from the cliffs. 6 of Odysseus's men were seized. Odysseus watched helplessly. There was no battle, no rescue, no strategy. Only the terrible price Circe had warned him he would have to pay. The ship escaped the passage, but 6 more companions were gone. Odysseus had survived again, and survival was becoming increasingly difficult to distinguish from loss. Eventually, the exhausted crew reached another island, Thrinacia, the island of the sun god Helios. Odysseus immediately remembered the prophecy of Tiresias. Do not touch the cattle. Circe had repeated the warning. The sacred herds belonged to Helios. If the men harmed them, disaster would follow. Odysseus wanted to sail past the island. His crew refused. They were exhausted. They demanded rest. Odysseus finally agreed under one condition. No one would touch the cattle. The men swore an oath. At first, they obeyed. Then the weather changed. Powerful winds trapped them on the island. Days passed, then weeks. Their supplies disappeared. Hunger began to consume them. Odysseus prayed to the gods for help. One day, while he was away from the others, exhaustion overcame him. He fell asleep, and while their king slept, the starving crew made a decision. Eurylochus spoke to the men. Better to risk the anger of the gods than slowly starve to death. They approached the sacred cattle. They killed them. When Odysseus returned, he smelled the cooking meat. His heart sank. The warning had been broken. The prophecy was moving toward fulfillment. Helios saw what had happened. Furious, he demanded justice from Zeus. If the men were not punished, Helios threatened to take his light away from the world of the living. When the weather finally cleared, Odysseus and his crew left the island. For a brief moment, the sea seemed peaceful. Then the sky turned black. Thunder rolled across the water. Zeus raised his power. A bolt of lightning struck the ship. Wood shattered. The mast broke. The vessel disappeared beneath the waves. Odysseus was thrown into the sea. Around him, the last of his companions vanished beneath the storm. Every man who had left Troy with him was now gone. 12 ships had become one. And now, one ship had become none. Odysseus was alone. No army, no crew, no kingdom beneath his command. He clung to broken pieces of the destroyed vessel as the sea carried him wherever it wished. For days he drifted. The king of Ithaca had been reduced to a single exhausted man holding onto wreckage in an endless ocean. Eventually, another island appeared. Odysseus reached its shore barely alive. The island was beautiful. Green forests, clear water, hidden caves, peaceful beaches untouched by war. Its name was Ogygia, and there lived a goddess, Calypso. She would save Odysseus from death. She would offer him comfort, safety, even immortality. But there would be a price. Odysseus had spent years trying to reach home. Now he was about to discover that the most beautiful prison could still be a prison. Odysseus was alone. Every ship was gone. Every warrior who had sailed with him from Troy was dead. He had once commanded hundreds of men. Now he possessed nothing. No ship, no army. No weapon that could defeat the sea. Only his life. The waves carried him toward the island of Ogygia. There, exhausted and nearly broken, Odysseus reached the shore. And there he met Calypso. She was no mortal woman. Calypso was a powerful divine being who lived far from the world of men, surrounded by forests, clear springs, beautiful caves, and an island untouched by war. She found Odysseus. She cared for him. She gave him food, shelter, safety. After years of bloodshed, storms, monsters, hunger, and death, Odysseus had finally reached a place where nothing was trying to kill him. But there was a problem. Calypso did not want him to leave. She loved Odysseus, and she offered him something no mortal king could normally possess: immortality. "Stay with me," she promised. "Remain on this island. Never grow old, never die." Think about the choice. Odysseus had spent years watching men die. He had spoken with the dead. He knew exactly how temporary human life was. Calypso was offering him an escape from all of it. No aging, no death, no dangerous voyage, no Poseidon, only paradise. And yet, Odysseus wanted Ithaca. Day after day, he walked to the shore. He sat beside the sea, and he looked toward a horizon that revealed nothing. Somewhere beyond it was Penelope. Somewhere beyond it was Telemachus. His home might be poor compared with the paradise surrounding him. Penelope was mortal. Odysseus himself would eventually grow old. But none of that mattered. Immortality without home was not the life he wanted. Years passed. 7 years, according to the ancient tale. Odysseus remained trapped on Ogygia, not behind walls, not inside chains, but trapped nonetheless. Far away, however, the gods had not forgotten him. Athena still favored Odysseus. She saw his suffering. She saw what was happening in Ithaca, and she appealed to Zeus. The time had come. Odysseus must be allowed to return home. Zeus agreed. Hermes was sent to Ogygia with a command. Calypso had to release him. She was angry, but she could not defy the will of Olympus. She told Odysseus he was free. For the first time in 7 years, the horizon was no longer a wall. Odysseus began working immediately. He cut timber. He shaped beams. He tied them together. With his own hands, the king who had once commanded a fleet built a simple raft. Calypso provided food, water, clothing, and supplies. Then the day came. Odysseus pushed the raft into the sea. Ogygia disappeared behind him. He was alone again, but this time he was moving toward home. For many days the voyage went well. Then Poseidon saw him. The god of the sea had not forgotten Polyphemus. He had not forgotten Odysseus's name. And he had not forgiven him. The sky darkened. Winds collided. The sea rose. Odysseus watched waves tower above his tiny raft. Then the storm struck. The raft was torn apart. Odysseus disappeared beneath the water. He fought his way back to the surface. There was almost nothing left to hold. For 2 days and nights he struggled through the sea. No crew remained to help him. No ship protected him. There was only Odysseus against the ocean. Eventually, land appeared. The country of the Phaeacians. Odysseus reached the shore with almost nothing remaining in his body. He crawled onto land. He covered himself beneath leaves and slept. The next day, he was discovered by Nausicaa, daughter of the Phaeacian king. Instead of treating the stranger as an enemy, she helped him. Odysseus was eventually brought before King Alcinous and Queen Arete. The Phaeacians welcomed him according to the ancient laws of hospitality. They fed him, they clothed him, and they listened. Odysseus finally told them who he was. He told them about Troy, the Cyclops, Circe, the Underworld, the Sirens, Scylla, Charybdis, the destruction of his crew, Calypso. Years of wandering became a story told inside a peaceful hall. The Phaeacians listened, and when Odysseus finished, they offered him the gift he had been searching for almost 10 years. Passage home. They placed Odysseus aboard one of their finest ships. This time, he did not command the vessel. He did not need to. He lay down and slept. While Odysseus slept, the ship crossed the sea. No monster stopped it. No temptation distracted him. No mistake from his crew changed the course. The voyage that had taken nearly 10 years was finally reaching its end. At last, the ship reached Ithaca. The Phaeacian sailors carried the sleeping Odysseus onto the shore. They placed the gifts they had given him nearby. Then they departed. Morning came. Odysseus opened his eyes. He looked around. At first, he did not recognize the land. Mist covered the landscape. 20 years had passed since he had last walked here. Then Athena appeared. She revealed the truth. This was Ithaca, home. Odysseus had imagined this moment thousands of times. Perhaps he had expected trumpets, servants, Penelope running toward him, Telemachus waiting at the palace gates. Instead, he stood alone upon a quiet shore, and Athena gave him another warning. The prophecy of Tiresias had come true. His palace had been invaded. For years, powerful men from Ithaca and the surrounding islands had assumed Odysseus was dead. They wanted Penelope, and whoever married the queen could claim the kingdom. The suitors had moved into Odysseus's own palace. They ate his food, drank his wine, killed his livestock, spent his wealth, and pressured Penelope to choose a new husband. Telemachus had grown into a young man surrounded by enemies inside his father's home. Odysseus had finally reached Ithaca, but he could not simply walk into the palace. If the suitors recognized him before he was ready, they could kill him. So Athena transformed his appearance. The king disappeared beneath the disguise of an old beggar. His skin appeared aged. His clothing became ragged. His strength was hidden. No one looking at him would see the legendary king who had destroyed Troy. That was exactly what Odysseus wanted. 20 years earlier, he had left Ithaca as a king. Now he returned as a stranger. He began walking toward his palace. Every road was familiar. Every hill carried memories. But the man walking through them had changed. He had fought beneath the walls of Troy. He had outsmarted a Cyclops. He had resisted the Sirens. He had spoken with the dead. He had lost every companion who sailed beside him. And now, only one final battle remained. Not against a monster, not against a god, but against the men sitting inside his home. Odysseus had finally returned to Ithaca, but Penelope did not yet know. Telemachus did not yet know, and the suitors celebrating inside his palace had no idea that the beggar approaching their doors was the king they believed was dead. Odysseus had finally returned to Ithaca, but after 20 years away, he could not yet return as its king. Athena had disguised him as an old beggar. His face was hidden beneath age. His clothes were torn. His body appeared weak. The man who had survived Troy, monsters, storms, and the anger of gods, could now walk through his own kingdom without being recognized. And that was exactly what he needed. Before entering the palace, Odysseus needed one person beside him, his son, Telemachus. When Odysseus had sailed for Troy, Telemachus had been an infant. Now he was a young man. For almost his entire life, Telemachus had known his father only through stories. Odysseus was the absent king, the warrior who had sailed to Troy, the man everyone increasingly believed would never return. Father and son finally met inside the humble shelter of Eumaeus, a loyal swineherd who had remained faithful to Odysseus. At first, Telemachus saw only an old stranger. Then Athena removed the disguise. The broken beggar seemed to disappear. Before Telemachus stood a powerful, weathered man, Odysseus, his father. Telemachus could barely believe what he was seeing. 20 years of absence stood between them, but there was little time for disbelief. Odysseus told his son the truth. He had returned, and together they would reclaim their home. Their plan required patience. Telemachus would return to the palace normally. Odysseus would enter later, still disguised as a beggar. No one could know who he was, not yet. When Odysseus finally entered his own palace, he discovered how completely his home had changed. The halls were filled with strangers. The suitors ate at his tables. They drank his wine. They ordered his servants around. They laughed beneath his roof. These men had spent years competing for Penelope. but their ambition went beyond marriage. Whoever married the queen could potentially claim Odysseus's kingdom. They believed the king was dead, and now the king stood among them, invisible. Some mocked the old beggar, others insulted him. Odysseus endured it. The warrior who had once commanded armies remained silent while arrogant young men humiliated him inside his own home. Because Odysseus had learned something during his journey. There was a time for pride, and there was a time for patience. Then something happened that almost broke his disguise. Near the palace lay an old dog, Argos. Long ago, before Odysseus had sailed for Troy, Argos had belonged to him. 20 years had passed. The animal was now old and neglected, but when the disguised Odysseus approached, Argos recognized him. The dog lifted his head, his ears moved, his tail gave a weak response. No one else understood, but Odysseus did. The king who had hidden his emotions before monsters and warriors had to turn his face away. He could not reveal himself. After seeing his master one final time, Argos died. Odysseus continued into the palace. Then he saw Penelope. 20 years had changed them both. She had waited through rumors, through uncertainty, through pressure from men who told her that her husband would never return. But Penelope had resisted. For years, she had delayed choosing another husband through intelligence worthy of Odysseus himself. She told the suitors that she could not remarry until she finished weaving a burial shroud for Odysseus's elderly father, Laertes. During the day, she worked at the loom. At night, she secretly undid what she had woven. For years, the deception delayed the marriage, but eventually the suitors discovered the trick. Penelope could not delay forever. A decision had to be made, and so she announced a contest, a challenge involving the weapon of the missing king, the bow of Odysseus. The task sounded simple. Whoever could string Odysseus's great bow and shoot an arrow cleanly through a line of 12 axe heads would win Penelope's hand. One by one, the suitors tried. Strong men lifted the bow. They pulled. They strained. They struggled. Some warmed it. Some rubbed it with fat, hoping to make the weapon easier to bend. Nothing worked. The bow refused them all. Then the old beggar spoke. He asked if he could try. The hall erupted with laughter and anger. What could this old stranger possibly do with a weapon that had defeated the strongest men in the room? Penelope allowed the attempt. Telemachus knew what was coming. Odysseus took the bow into his hands. For a moment, perhaps he remembered another life. A younger man, a peaceful Ithaca, a wife, an infant son, a world before Troy. Then, Odysseus strung the bow. Effortlessly, the laughter disappeared. The room became silent. Odysseus placed an arrow against the string. He aimed, released. The arrow passed cleanly through the axe heads. And in that moment, the beggar disappeared. Not through magic, through recognition. The men inside the hall finally understood. Odysseus was home. The doors were secured. Weapons had been removed from the suitors' reach. Telemachus stood beside his father. The suitors who had spent years consuming the king's wealth suddenly found themselves trapped inside the palace, with the man they had assumed was dead. Some begged, some tried to bargain, others reached for weapons. But the judgment had already begun. Odysseus raised his bow. After 20 years of war and wandering, the king reclaimed his house. When it was over, silence returned to the palace. But one question remained. Penelope. Odysseus had revealed himself to Telemachus. He had reclaimed his home. But would his wife believe him? 20 years is a long time. Men could lie. Stories could be invented. Appearances could deceive. Penelope had survived precisely because she did not trust easily. So she tested him. She ordered that their marriage bed be moved from the room. Odysseus reacted immediately. Move the bed? Impossible. He himself had built it. Long ago, an olive tree had grown where their bedroom would stand. Odysseus had built the room around that living tree. He carved the bed from its trunk. One of its posts was still rooted into the earth. The bed could not simply be moved. Only two people knew that secret: Odysseus and Penelope. Her doubt disappeared. This was him, not a story, not an impostor, not another traveler carrying news from a distant land. Her husband had returned. After 20 years, Odysseus and Penelope were together again. Think about everything separating those two moments. The day Odysseus sailed from Ithaca, and the day Penelope finally recognized him. Troy had risen and fallen. Achilles had died. Hector had died. Odysseus had crossed seas no ordinary traveler would willingly enter. He had escaped the Cyclops. He had angered Poseidon. He had encountered Circe. He had walked among the dead. He had heard the Sirens. He had passed Scylla and Charybdis. He had lost every ship, every companion. He had rejected immortality. He had been thrown across the sea again and again, and through all of it, one idea remained: home. That is what makes the Odyssey more than a story about monsters. The monsters are unforgettable. The gods are magnificent. The adventures are legendary. But beneath all of them is something far simpler: a man trying to return to the people he loves. Odysseus was not perfect. His intelligence saved him repeatedly. His pride also created terrible consequences. He could be patient and reckless, loyal and arrogant, wise enough to defeat Troy, yet foolish enough to shout his name to the Cyclops. Perhaps that is why his story survived. Odysseus does not endure because he is invincible. He endures because every time the world throws him somewhere new, he finds another way forward. Strength fails. Ships break. Friends disappear. Plans collapse. Even gods stand against him. And still, he continues. In the end, the greatest victory of Odysseus was not the Trojan horse. It was not escaping Polyphemus. It was not surviving the Sirens. It was returning to Ithaca, returning to Telemachus, returning to Penelope, returning to the life that 20 years of war and wandering had failed to erase from his memory. Outside the palace, the island was quiet. The same sea that had kept Odysseus away for so long moved gently against the shores of Ithaca. The storms were finally behind him. The wandering was over. The warrior had returned from Troy. The traveler had crossed the impossible sea. The stranger had reclaimed his name. And after 20 years, Odysseus was home.